Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something pretty profound.
Yeah.
Different levels of consciousness in the human mind.
That's a big one.
It is.
Yeah, it's fascinating, though.
It is. And it's one that we often don't really take the time to consider.
Right.
So we are going to be using a YouTube video featuring a talk by OSHO as our source material for this deep dive. It's actually one of his speeches delivered in Hindi.
Oh,
But don't worry, we'll break it down for you. What's really interesting about this specific talk is the way Osho uses such vivid imagery and relatable examples to bring these complex ideas to life. It's almost like he's telling a story.
yeah, he really was a master at that, making even the most abstract concepts feel incredibly accessible. So in this deep dive, we're going to go on a journey with Osho, exploring the hidden depths of the human mind.
Ooh, I like that.
And who knows, we might even uncover a few hidden depths within ourselves along the way.
I love that. So let's jump right in. Osho's core concept here is that the human mind is structured like a house, with three distinct levels, or stories as he calls them: the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious.
Okay? And just like in a house, each level has its own unique function and characteristics. The conscious mind, according to Osho, is like that brightly lit top floor where we spend most of our waking lives. It's the part of us that interacts with the world, makes decisions, holds our self-image. It's also the level that's most heavily influenced by our upbringing, societal norms, and the roles we play in life.
Okay, so it's like the public face we present to the world.
Exactly. But what's really interesting is that beneath this surface level, there's a whole lot more going on. And that brings us to the second floor of our metaphorical house, the subconscious. This level's a bit dimmer, less accessible. It's where memories, emotions, and beliefs that we're not actively aware of reside. Think of it like a storage room, filled with boxes of experiences we've pushed aside, maybe even forgotten about, but that still have a powerful influence on our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
So even though we might not be consciously aware of these things, they're still impacting us in subtle ways.
Absolutely. It's like having a program running in the background of your computer. You might not see it, but it's still affecting how your computer operates. And then even deeper down, in the basement of our mind, lies the unconscious. Osho describes this as a dark, hidden space, almost like a vast, unexplored territory. But here's the thing, he also says that this level holds immense power.
I'm already getting chills.
It's a pretty powerful image, right?
Yeah.
And it's in the unconscious, according to Osho, that we find our primal instincts, our deepest, drives the raw material of our being. It's also where he believes our true connection to what he calls life's essence resides.
Okay, now I definitely need a little more clarification on that. What exactly does he mean by life's essence? It sounds a bit vague.
You're right, that's a great question, and one that deserves a deeper dive. In essence, what Osho is pointing to here is this idea of a universal life force, a source of energy and creativity that flows through all living things. He believes that this essence, this connection to something larger than ourselves, is present within each of us, but it's often buried beneath layers of conditioning and unconscious patterns.
So it's like we're all connected to this incredible source of energy, but we've kind of lost touch with it.
Exactly. And for Osho, the path to rediscovering this connection lies in exploring the depths of our own minds, facing our fears, and bringing light to those dark corners. Now here's where things get really interesting. Osho argues that most people live primarily on that top floor in the conscious mind, completely oblivious to the powerful forces that play beneath the surface.
So we're walking around making decisions, going about our lives, totally unaware of the subconscious and unconscious programs running in the background.
Precisely. And as you can imagine, that can lead to some serious internal conflict. Think about it. We're constantly being bombarded with messages from society, from our families, telling us how we should think, feel, and behave. But often these messages clash with our deeper, more primal instincts.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, right? There's bound to be some friction.
That's a great analogy. And according to Osho, this friction, this inner conflict, is the root of a lot of our suffering.
So how do we even begin to address this conflict? How do we reconcile these different parts of ourselves?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And thankfully, Osho offers some guidance. But to understand his solution, we need to first take a closer look at the problem. One of the most compelling points he makes is that much of what we're taught on a conscious level is actually at odds with our deeper subconscious and unconscious drives. It's like we're being pulled in two opposite directions.
It sounds exhausting.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we often don't even realize it's happening. We just feel this constant tension, this sense of being out of alignment with ourselves.
So can you give us some specific examples of how this plays out in our lives? How do these conflicting messages manifest?
Let's take anger, for example. As children, many of us are taught that anger is bad, that we should suppress it, hide it away. So we learn to do just that, pushing those angry feelings down into the basement of our minds.
Mm.
But of course, those feelings don't just disappear, they fester down there, gaining strength in the darkness.
Okay, that makes sense. So then years later, something triggers that old anger. Maybe someone cuts us off in traffic, and boom, we erupt in a way that seems totally disproportionate to the situation.
Exactly. And that's just one example. This dynamic can play out in so many different areas of our lives. With sadness, fear, even with our desires and ambitions,
Mhm.
we're constantly receiving messages both internally and externally. That tells us to be one way, while our deeper selves are yearning for something else entirely.
So we end up living these fragmented, disintegrated lives, always at war with ourselves.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it's this disintegration, this lack of wholeness, that Osho challenges us to confront. He's calling for a revolution, an uprising of consciousness that integrates all levels of our being.
I'm ready to join the revolution. But how do we actually do that? How do we bridge the gap between these different parts of ourselves?
Well, Osho offers a radical solution,
Mm.
one that goes against much of what we've been taught about how to deal with our so-called negative emotions. But before we dive into his approach,
Mm.
let's take a moment to understand why the traditional methods often fail.
All right, let's hear it.
Osho was highly critical of the traditional approach to dealing with emotions that are deemed negative or undesirable. He argued that trying to suppress them, push them down, or ignore them only makes things worse in the long run.
So he's saying that all that positive vibes only stuff is actually counterproductive.
Essentially, yes. Now, of course, it's natural to want to avoid unpleasant feelings. Who wants to wallow in sadness or rage all day? But Osho's point is that when we try to force those feelings away, we're actually giving them more power. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can push it down for a while, but eventually it's going to pop back up, often with even greater force.
That's a great analogy, and I think a lot of us can relate to that experience of trying to suppress our emotions only to have them erupt later in unhealthy ways. So if suppressing our emotions isn't the answer, what is? What does Osho suggest we do instead?
He proposes a radically different path: observation. Instead of fighting against our emotions, he suggests that we observe them, almost as if we were a scientist studying a fascinating new phenomenon.
So instead of judging ourselves for feeling angry or sad, we simply acknowledge those feelings, allow ourselves to experience them without getting swept away.
Precisely. It's about creating a space between ourselves and our emotions, a space where we can observe them with curiosity and without judgment.
It sounds a lot like mindfulness, which is so popular these days.
You're absolutely right. Osho was talking about these concepts decades before mindfulness became a mainstream phenomenon. And in a way, he was ahead of his time. He understood that true freedom doesn't come from suppressing our emotions, but from developing a more conscious and accepting relationship with them.
Okay, so observation is key, but how does that actually work in practice? If I'm feeling angry, how do I simply observe that anger without letting it take over?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
And to help us understand the power of observation, Osho uses a brilliant analogy. He tells this captivating story about the three rishis who are essentially wise sages in Hindu mythology. These rishis get invited to Indra's celestial celebration. And you have to understand, Indra is like the king of the gods. It's a huge deal to be invited to this party.
Okay, so the stakes are high. These rishis are clearly respected figures, deeply committed to their spiritual practice.
Exactly. And part of the practice involves celibacy. Now, at this party, Indra decides to test their commitment. He sends out this incredibly beautiful apsara, a celestial dancer, to tempt them. And she starts shedding her clothes as she dances, trying to distract them.
Oh, wow, that's a tough test. So how did the rishis react?
Two of them immediately panic and try to resist the temptation by closing their eyes. But guess what? It totally backfired.
I bet it made things even worse. Trying to ignore something that powerful doesn't usually work.
Exactly. They're still aware of her presence, of the temptation. They're just trying to block it out. Their inner turmoil actually intensifies. It's a classic example of what happens when we try to suppress our desires or emotions.
So they're fighting against their own nature, which, as we've been discussing, creates that inner conflict that Osho talks about. But what about the third rishi? How does he handle the situation?
He's the interesting one. He doesn't close his eyes. He doesn't try to fight the temptation or pretend it's not there. He simply observes the apsara, acknowledging her beauty, without judgment, without getting caught up in the desire.
Whoa, that's powerful. So he's not denying his natural response to beauty, but he's not letting it control him either.
Exactly. And because he's not engaging in that inner struggle, he remains completely unshaken. The story beautifully illustrates that full awareness, that non-judgmental observation, can actually help us transcend our desires.
It's not about pretending we don't have those desires or emotions. It's about choosing how we want to relate to them, right?
Yes. It's about recognizing that they're a part of our human experience, but not letting them dictate our actions or define who we are. Now, I know you're thinking,
Let me guess. How do we actually do this in real life? It's one thing to hear a story about a wise sage, but how do we apply this to our own messy, complicated lives?
you read my mind. And thankfully, Osho doesn't just leave us hanging with these grand philosophical concepts. He actually gives some really practical advice on how to cultivate this observational awareness in our everyday lives.
Okay, I'm all ears.
He talks a lot about meditation, but not necessarily in the traditional sense of sitting on a cushion for hours trying to empty your mind.
That's good to hear because I'm not sure I have that kind of time.
Me neither. Osho's approach is much more about bringing mindful awareness to our everyday experiences. He suggests starting small, maybe taking just a few minutes each day to sit quietly and observe your breath, your thoughts, your emotions, without judgment.
So just noticing what's happening within without getting carried away by the storyline.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that even just a few minutes of this practice can start to shift your relationship to your inner world. It's like creating a little space, a pause button, in the midst of all the mental chatter.
I can see how that would be helpful. It's like hitting the refresh button on your computer when things start to get glitchy.
I love that analogy.
Mhm.
And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes to bring that awareness to your daily life. You start to notice those automatic reactions, those moments when you're about to get swept away by anger, fear, or judgment.
And in those moments, you have a choice. You can either react unconsciously or you can pause, observe, and choose a different response.
Precisely. And that's where true freedom lies.
This reminds me of another key point Osho makes. The importance of looking at our chief character flaw, the thing we struggle with most, the part of ourselves we try hardest to hide.
Yes. And get this. He actually suggests that this flaw, this shadow, as it's often called, is actually the doorway to our greatest potential.
Whoa, that's a mind-blowing concept. Can you unpack that a bit more?
It's like he's saying, embrace the darkness, because that's where the light can enter. Instead of trying to deny or suppress those parts of ourselves that we deem negative or undesirable, he's encouraging us to explore them, to understand where they come from, and to see what they can teach us about ourselves.
So it's not about trying to become perfect or eliminate those flaws, but rather about integrating them, accepting them as part of the wholeness of who we are.
You got it. And Osho even goes a step further, suggesting that these flaws, these shadows, are often connected to our greatest strengths.
It sounds paradoxical, but I'm starting to understand what he's getting at. Can you give us an example of how this might play out?
Let's say someone's biggest struggle is with insecurity. They're constantly doubting themselves, comparing themselves to others, feeling like they're not good enough. Now, on the surface, insecurity might seem like a purely negative trait, something that holds us back. But what if we looked at it from a different perspective? What if that insecurity was actually a sign of a deep sensitivity, a capacity for empathy and understanding that others might not possess?
So it's like those same qualities that make us feel insecure can also be our greatest gifts.
Exactly. And this is where the real transformation happens. Not by denying or suppressing those parts of ourselves, but by integrating them, understanding them as part of the unique tapestry of who we are.
It's like we're putting together a puzzle. And those shadow pieces, the ones we might try to hide, are actually essential for completing the picture.
I love that analogy. And Osho really emphasizes that this process of facing our shadows, of integrating these different parts of ourselves, isn't about self-criticism or judgment. It's about compassion, about bringing those hidden aspects of ourselves into the light of awareness with kindness and understanding.
He's saying, don't judge yourself for feeling angry, jealous, or insecure. Just observe those feelings, understand where they're coming from, and see what they can teach you about yourself.
Yes, it's about becoming a curious explorer of your own inner landscape, recognizing that even those dark, shadowy places hold treasures waiting to be discovered.
That's such a powerful image, and it really speaks to the transformative potential of Osho's teachings.
Absolutely. He's not just offering us a set of beliefs or practices. He's inviting us on a journey of self-discovery, a journey that leads to greater wholeness, freedom, and authenticity.
And speaking of journeys, this whole deep dive has really been about exploring the intricate landscape of the human mind, hasn't it? We've gone from understanding the different levels of consciousness to exploring the power of observation and the importance of facing our shadow selves.
It's been quite an adventure. And all of this, as Osho suggests, is essential for living a more conscious, fulfilling, and meaningful life. But there's one more key insight from his talk that I think is worth exploring.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's his analogy of the crumbling temple. He describes this old, decaying temple, representing our outdated belief systems, our rigid mental structures, the ways we cling to the familiar even when it's no longer serving us.
It's like those patterns of thinking and behaving that we've outgrown, but we're still holding on to them out of fear or habit.
Exactly. And Osho uses the image of the wind blowing the walls, shaking, to illustrate how life is constantly challenging those old structures, trying to break them down. But often, instead of embracing this process of change, we resist it.
We cling to those crumbling walls. Even though they're no longer keeping us safe or supporting our growth, it's like we're afraid of what might happen if we let go.
That's a perfect way to put it. And Osho's point is that this clinging to the old is what prevents us from building something new and authentic. He's suggesting that this destruction, this letting go, is actually the first step towards true creation and spiritual growth.
It's like you have to clear out the debris before you can build a new foundation.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be diving deeper into next time, when we continue this exploration of the crumbling temple and what it means to build something new and true.
I'm excited to continue this journey with you. Until next time, keep exploring.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be diving deeper into next time when we continue this exploration of the crumbling temple and what it means to build something new and true.
I'm excited to continue this journey with you. Until next time, keep exploring. I'm excited to continue this journey with you. Until next time, keep exploring.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the human mind with Osho. So last time we were talking about the analogy of the crumbling temple.
Right.
It can be really scary to let go of those old structures, those beliefs and habits that have defined us for so long. It's like stepping into the unknown.
It is, and I think that's why so many of us resist change even when we know it's necessary. We become attached to our suffering, to our familiar patterns, even when they're no longer serving us. Right, and Osho is really challenging us to confront that resistance, to be willing to let go of those crumbling walls, even if it feels terrifying. He's saying that true growth, true transformation requires us to embrace the process of destruction.
He's urging us to become conscious creators of our own lives, not just passive inhabitants of those crumbling temples.
That's such a powerful image. It's like we have the power to demolish those old structures and build something entirely new, something that reflects who we truly are.
And what's amazing is that Osho suggests this process of demolition, of letting go, is actually the key to unlocking our creative potential. He's saying that it's in those empty spaces and the ruins of the old that something new and beautiful can emerge.
It's like those Japanese kintsugi bowls, where broken pottery is repaired with gold. The cracks become part of the beauty, a testament to the object's resilience and transformation.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. And it really speaks to the power of embracing our imperfections, of seeing those broken places as opportunities for growth and transformation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What are some key takeaways that our listeners can apply to their own lives?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is the importance of moving beyond that surface level of awareness, of recognizing that there's a whole lot more going on beneath the surface of our conscious minds.
So it's about acknowledging the influence of those subconscious and unconscious forces that are shaping our thoughts, feelings, and behavior.
Exactly. And once we become aware of these forces, we can start to work with them instead of against them.
And that brings us back to Osho's radical solution, observation. Instead of trying to suppress or deny those difficult emotions, those shadow parts of ourselves, he's encouraging us to observe them with curiosity and compassion.
Yeah, it's about creating space for those emotions to exist without judgment, to understand where they're coming from, and to see what they can teach us about ourselves.
And I think the Rishi in the Apsara story beautifully illustrates this point. The Rishi who remained unshaken in the face of temptation wasn't the one who tried to deny his desire. It was the one who observed it with awareness and non-judgment.
Right. It's such a powerful reminder that we don't have to be controlled by our emotions or desires. We can choose how we want to relate to them.
And that choice, that freedom to choose our response, is what ultimately leads to greater wholeness, authenticity, and inner peace.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that this journey of self-discovery isn't about achieving some kind of perfect state of bliss, where we never experience negative emotions again. It's about developing a more conscious and accepting relationship with all parts of ourselves, the light and the shadow.
It's about recognizing that those shadow parts, those flaws and imperfections, are actually integral to our growth and evolution.
They're the cracks that let the light in, as Leonard Cohen so beautifully put it.
I love that. So as we conclude this deep dive into the depths of human consciousness, we want to leave you with a question to ponder. What if the key to your greatest growth lies hidden within the very thing you've been trying to avoid?
What if embracing your shadow self, those parts of yourself that you might deem unacceptable or unworthy, is actually the path to unlocking your full potential?
We encourage you to explore those darker corners of your mind with curiosity and compassion. You might be surprised by the treasures you find there.
And remember, the journey of self-discovery is a lifelong adventure. There's always more to explore, more to uncover, more to integrate.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.